making money off of a book or movie deal based on your work?
No. There's two parts to your question. The first part of your question, you asked me whether or not I had spoken to people regarding a possible book deal. And I have. And I've spoken to people who have sought me out regarding a movie deal.
No, I didn't ask you if you'd
That was
spoken
the
to
first part of your
anybody.
question.
I said, can you commit under oath that you will not, that you have not and will not pursue a book deal?
And I would not do that, no.
Okay. Can you commit under oath that you will not pursue opportunities to provide commentary for a major news network based on your experiences working for the president?
No.
Can you commit under oath that you will not pursue political office in the state of New York?
No.
So you don't commit to changing your ways, basically, because you want to continue to use your background as a liar, a cheater, a convicted liar to make money. That's what you want to do.
And that's going to get me a book deal and a movie deal and television and a spot on television? I don't think so.
Well, it appears that it will. I'd yield my time, remainder of my time, Mr. Chairman, to Mr. Jordan.
I thank the gentlelady for yielding. Mr. Cohen, in your sentencing statement to the court in December of last year, you said, "I want to apologize to the people of the United States. You deserve to know the truth." Approximately a month later, BuzzFeed News ran a story that was the story in the country for a couple days. BuzzFeed's story ran January 17th, 2019. On January 18th, your counsel went on TV and wouldn't confirm or deny the story. The next day, the special counsel's office did something that's never happened. Never happened. They said the description of specific statements to the special counsel's office and the characterization of documents and testimony obtained by this office regarding Michael Cohen's congressional testimony are not accurate. Why didn't your lawyer, the day that he's on TV, when this story is the biggest thing in the news in the country, why didn't he deny the BuzzFeed story?
Because I didn't think it was his responsibility to do that. We are not the fact checkers for BuzzFeed.
He's on TV to talk about the very story you committed to the courts when you were trying to get your sentence reduced, that the American people deserve to know the truth. You had the golden opportunity to give them the truth on a false story, the BuzzFeed story, and your lawyer didn't say a thing. He actually he said this: "I can't confirm, I can't deny." You had an opportunity to do exactly what you told the judge you were going to do 1 month after you said it, and you didn't do it. Why not?
Again, it wasn't our responsibility to be the fact checker for the news agencies.
This is the biggest story in the country.
Sir, please let me. The president says so far approximately 9,000.
I got 8 seconds. I got 8 seconds. I'll let you finish.
Chairman, may I please
finish? The special counsel
Chairman, can I
said
please finish?
something they've never done. They said that story was false. Now you can respond.
Okay. My response. The president has told something over 9,000 lies to date. Do I ask Mr. Davis or Mr. Monaco, or do I go on television in order to correct his mistakes?
When Mr. Davis goes on to talk about that
no.
specific subject,
The answer
should.
is no. And I would like to also...
Listen up. The gentleman's time has expired. You may finish answering the question, and then we're going to go to Mr. Connolly.
All I wanted to say is I just find it interesting, sir, that between yourself and your colleagues, that not one question so far since I'm here has been asked about President Trump. That's actually why I thought I was coming today, not to confess the mistakes that I've made. I've already done that, and I'll do it again every time you ask me about taxes or mistakes. Yes, I made my mistakes. I'll say it now again, and I'm going to pay the ultimate price. But I'm not here today, and the American people don't care about my taxes. They want to know what it is that I know about Mr. Trump, and not one question so far has been asked about Mr. Trump.
Mr. Connolly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, Mr. Cohen, based on your testimony and your 10-year experience, I think you can recognize the behavior you're being subjected to on the other side of the aisle. Discredit, slander, use any trick in the book to prevent your testimony from sticking. The idea that a witness would come to us who's flawed, and you certainly are flawed, means they can never tell the truth. and there is no validity whatsoever to a single word they say, would discredit every single criminal trial of organized crime in the history of the United States, because all of them depend on someone who's turned. It would make RICO null and void. We couldn't use it anymore. This Congress historically has relied on all kinds of shady figures who turned. One of the most famous who led to the decapitation of the organized crime families in America, Joe Valachi, congressional hearing. He was a witness, and he committed a lot worse crimes than you're convicted of, Mr. Cohen. So don't be fooled by what my friends on the other side of the aisle are trying to do today. It is do everything but focus on the principle, known as individual number one in the Southern District of New York, as I recall. Is that correct, Mr. Cohen?
That is correct.
Now, Mr. Cohen, I want to ask about something that's not in your testimony and that so far has not been made public. In our committee staff search of documents provided by the White House that were otherwise redacted or already in the public, and I guess the White House thought that was funny, they made one mistake, the White House. There was an email from a special assistant to the president to a deputy White House counsel, and the email is dated May 16th, 2017, and it says, and I quote, POTUS, meaning the president, requested a meeting on Thursday with Michael Cohen and Jay Sekulow. Any idea what this might be about, end quote. Do you recall being asked to come to the White House on or around that time with Mr. Sekulow? May of 2017.
Off the top of my head, sir, I don't. I recall being in the White House with Jay Sekulow, and it was in regard to the documents, the document production, as well as my appearance before the House Select Intel. But I'm not sure if that's specifically what you're referring. But what I will do is I will check all my records, and I'm more than happy to provide you with any documentation or a response to this question.
Well, that's, you sort of touch on presumably the purpose of the discussion, at least among others. This meeting occurred just before your testimony before the Select Committee on Intelligence here in the House. Is that correct?
I believe so, yes.
Was that a topic of conversation with the President himself?
If this is the specific instance that I was there with Mr. Sekulow, yes.
So you had a conversation with the President of the United States about your impending testimony before the House Intelligence Committee. Is that correct?
That's correct.
What was the nature of that conversation?
He wanted me to cooperate. He also wanted just to ensure, by making the statement, and I said it in my testimony, there is no Russia, there is no collusion, there is no deal. He goes, it's all a witch hunt, and he goes, this stuff has to end.
Did you take those comments to be suggestive of what might flavor your testimony?
Sir, he's been saying that to me for many, many months. And at the end of the day, I knew exactly what he wanted me to say.
And why was Mr. Sekulow in the meeting?
Because he was going to be representing Mr. Trump going forward as one of his personal attorneys in this matter.
So it was sort of a handoff meeting.
Correct.
In any way, final question, did the President in any way, from your point of view, coach you in terms of how to respond to questions or the content of your testimony before a House committee?
Again, it's a difficult answer because he doesn't tell you what he wants. What he does is, again, Michael, there's no Russia, there's no collusion, there's no involvement, there's no interference. I know what he means because I've been around him for so long. So if you're asking me whether or not that's the message, that's staying on point, that's the party line that he created, that so many others are now touting, yes, that's the message that he wanted to reinforce.
Gentleman's time has expired.
Thank you.
Mr. Massey.
Mr. Cohen, can you just clarify, did you say that at times you would do what you thought Mr. Trump wanted you to do, not specifically what he told you to do?
At times, yes.
So you just went on your intuition.
I don't know if I would call it intuition as much as I would just say my knowledge of what he wanted, because it happened before, and I knew what he had wanted.
Does a lawyer have a duty to provide his client with good legal advice?
Yes,
Were you a good lawyer to Mr. Trump?
I believe so.
When you arranged a payment to Ms. Clifford, you say in your testimony, I'm going to quote from your testimony, that you did so, quote, without bothering to consider whether that was improper, much less whether it was the right thing to do. You said that, unquote. That's your testimony today. You said you didn't even consider whether it was legal. How could you give your client legal advice when you're not even considering whether it's legal?
I did what I knew Mr. Trump wanted. This conversation with Mr. Trump started.
I didn't ask whether you're a good fixer. I asked whether you were a good lawyer.
Sometimes you have to melt both together. I needed to, at that time, ensure and protect Mr. Trump. And if I put which I'm clearly suffering the penalty of, I clearly erred on the side of wrong.
So you feel like without bothering to consider whether it was proper, much less whether it was the right thing to do, by ignoring any conscience, if you have one, that you were protecting Mr. Trump.
I'm sorry, sir, I don't understand.
You feel that was how to protect, as his lawyer, you feel that you did a good job. You said you were a good lawyer, right?
Is
that being a good lawyer? To not even consider whether it's legal or not?
I didn't work for the campaign. I was working and I was trying to protect Mr. Trump. I sat with Mr. Trump, and this goes back all the way to 2011. This wasn't the first scenario with Ms. Daniels.
Let's go back then.
So my point is, this was an ongoing situation. It didn't just start in October.
Right.
Sir, please, you have to let me finish.
Well,
it didn't start in October.
Let me
it
ask you
started
specifically
many
on that.
years earlier.
When were you disbarred?
Yesterday, from what I read in the paper.
Yesterday. When should you have been disbarred, based on the legal counsel you were giving your client?
I don't have an answer for your question.
How long were you counsel for Mr. Trump?
Since 2007.
When is the first time you gave him bad legal advice or failed to inform him of his legal obligations, as you testified today you did in the case of the payment to Ms. Clifford? When was the first time you did that? Would that qualify for disbarment?
I don't know, sir. I'm not the Bar Association.
I think you should consult with them maybe occasionally on some of these things.
Well, there's no point now. I lost my law license.
Has anybody else promised to pay Mr. Davis for representing you?
No.
Nobody has.
No. Are you offering?
Question, quickly. You said, and this is also in your testimony, in the days before the Democratic Convention, you became privy to a conversation that some of Hillary Clinton's emails would be leaked. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. Was that you said late July? Do you know the exact day?
I believe it was either the 18th or the 19th, and I would guess that it would be on the 19th.
But it was definitely July.
I believe so, yes.
Do you know that was public knowledge in June? This was Mr. Assange, and I'd like to submit this, unanimous consent to submit this for the record.
Without objection, so.
Mr. Assange reported to the media on June 12th that those emails would be leaked. So I'm not saying you have fake news, I'm saying you have old news, and there's really not much to that. I would like to yield the remainder of my time to Mr. Higgins.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Cohen, I'm quoting you close I can. Earlier said, I spent last week looking through boxes to find documents that would support your accusations. Where are those boxes, good sir? Where are those boxes? Are they in your garage? Or?
They're in the storage.
And are these not boxes that should have been turned over to investigative authorities during the many criminal investigations you've been subject to?
Sir, these are the boxes that were returned to me
If
post the raid.
if they include data pertinent to crimes that you've committed, should they not have been turned over and remanded to investigative authority? Did Mr. Lanny Davis know of these boxes?
No,
The gentleman's time has expired. You may answer the question.
I don't understand his question, sir.
Very well. Christian Morsi.
Mr. Cohen. Good morning. Thank you, Chairman Cummings, for convening this hearing, and thank you, Mr. Cohen, for voluntarily testifying this morning. Mr. Cohen, you were the Executive Vice President and Special Counsel for the Trump Organization, correct?
I was the Executive Vice President, Special Counsel to Donald J. Trump.
And Special Counsel means you were the attorney for him, is that right?
Just means I was there in order to handle matters that he felt were significant and important to him individually.
And those include legal matters?
Yes, sir.
Sir, as a former attorney, you're familiar with legal documents known as non-disclosure agreements, or NDAs, is that right?
Yes.
Sir, I'm sure you know that NDAs, properly written in scope, can be reasonable in certain business contexts, but they can also be abused to create a chilling effect to silence people, as we've seen in the Me Too movement and other places. Isn't that right, Mr. Cohen?
Yes.
And Mr. Cohen, the Trump Organization used NDAs extensively, isn't that right?
That's correct.
Mr. Cohen, I'm reading from a recent Washington Post article regarding the language in one of these types of NDAs where the terms were described as very broad. For instance, the terms confidential information was defined to be anything that, quote, Mr. Trump insists remain private or confidential, including but not limited to any information with respect to the personal life, political affairs, and or business affairs of Mr. Trump or any family member, close quote. Do those terms sound familiar to you?
I've seen that document.
In fact, there's a class action lawsuit filed this month by former Trump campaign worker Jessica Denson that this NDA language is illegal because it is too broad, too vague, and would be used to retaliate against employees who complain of illegality or wrongdoing. Would you agree that in the use of the these types of NDAs with this type of language, and later when Donald Trump sought to enforce them, that he intended to prevent people from coming forward with claims of wrongdoing?
Yes.
Would you agree that the effect of the use of these NDAs and their enforcement was to have a chilling effect on people or silence them from coming forward?
I apologize. If you want to define chilling, I'm not sure.
Oh, just that he would, in using these NDAs or trying to enforce them, would basically try to keep people silent.
That was the goal.
And nothing at the Trump Organization was ever done unless it was run through President Donald Trump, correct?
That's 100% certain.
Okay. Mr. Cohen, do you believe that there are people out there today, either from the President's business or personal life, who are not coming forward to tell their stories of wrongdoing because of the President's use of NDAs against them?
I'm sorry, sir. I don't know the answer to that question.
Okay. Sir, I have a couple other questions for you. When was the last communication with President Trump or someone acting on his behalf?
I don't have the specific date, but it was a while ago.
Okay. Do you have a general time frame?
I would suspect it was within 2 months post the raid of my my home
Okay, so
hotel,
early fall of last year, generally.
generally.
And what did he or his agent communicate to you?
Unfortunately, this topic is actually something that's being investigated right now by the Southern District of New York, and I've been asked by them not to discuss and not to talk about these issues.
Fair enough. Is there any other wrongdoing or illegal act that you are aware of regarding Donald Trump that we haven't yet discussed today?
Yes, and again, those are part of the investigation that's currently being looked at by the Southern District of New York.
Sir, Congressman Cooper asked you about whether you were aware of any physical violence committed by President Trump. I just have a couple quick questions. Do you have any knowledge of President Trump abusing any controlled substances?
I'm not aware of that, no.
Do you have any knowledge of President Trump being delinquent on any alimony or child care payments?
I'm not aware of any of that.
Do you have any knowledge of President Trump arranging any health care procedures for any women not in his family?
I'm not aware of that, no.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you.
Mr. Cloud.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Cohen, can you tell me the significance of May 6th?
In terms of, sir?
A couple months from now.
That's the day that I need to surrender
Yes,
to
sir.
federal
it is.
prison.
Could you, for the record, state what you've been convicted of?
I've been convicted on 5 counts of tax evasion. There's 1 count of misrepresentation of documents to a bank. There's 2 counts, one dealing with campaign finance for Karen McDougal, 1 count of campaign finance violation for Stormy Daniels, as well as lying to Congress.
Thank you. Can you state what your official title with the campaign was
I did not have a campaign title.
and your position in the Trump administration?
I did not have one.
Okay, in today's testimony, you said that you were not looking to work in the White House. The Southern District of New York, in their statement, their sentencing memo, says this: Cohen's criminal violations in the federal election laws were also stirred, like others' crimes, by his own ambition and greed. Cohen privately told friends, colleagues, and including seized text messages, that he expected to be given a prominent role in the new administration. When that did not materialize, Cohen found a way to monetize his relationship and access with the president. So were they lying, or were you lying today?
I'm not saying it's a lie. I'm just saying it's not accurate. I did not want to go to the White House. I retained, and I brought an attorney in, and I sat with Mr. Trump, with him, for well over an hour, explaining the importance of having a personal attorney, that every president has had one, in order to handle matters like the matters I was dealing with, which included, say, like Summer
reclaim my
Zervos,
time.
Stormy Daniels, I was dealing with Stephanie
I ask
Clifford,
unanimous consent
and other
to
personal
submit
matters
the
that
sentencing
needed.
memo. Excuse me, this is my time. Thank you. I ask unanimous consent to submit the sentencing memo from the Southern District of New York for the record.
Without objections ordered.
It's fine. All right, I'll get that to you in a second. Okay, this memo states that you committed 4 distinct federal crimes over a period of several years. You were motivated to do so by personal greed and repeatedly used your power to influence for deceptive ends. It goes on to say that they each involved, they were distinct in their harms, but bear a common set of characteristics, that they involved deception and were each motivated by personal greed and ambition. There's a lot we don't know in regards to this investigation, but here's what we do know. We know that you were expecting a job at the White House and didn't get it. You made millions lying about your close access to the president. You have a history of lying for personal gain, including that's banks, about your accountant, to law enforcement, and your family, the Congress, the American people. The Southern District of New York, you've said that you did all this out of blind loyalty to Mr. Trump, but your sentencing memo states this: this was not an act out of blind loyalty, as Cohen suggests. Cohen was driven by a desire to further ingratiate himself with a potential future president for whose political success Cohen himself claimed credit for. Now, we're in a search for truth, and I don't know, Chairman, how we're supposed to ascertain the truth in this quagmire of a hearing when the best witness we can bring before this has already been convicted of lying before us. And what's sad is the American people have seen this play out before. We have people in prominent positions fail, and then a couple years later they get a book deal. Now, you're set to go to jail for a couple years. You come out with a multi-million book deal. That's not bad living. And so my question is will you today to commit to donate any further proceeds to book deals, to film reviews, to charity?
No.
Thank you. I yield my time.
Will the gentleman yield?
Now,
Will the gentleman yield?
now,
yield.
may I finish?
Will the gentleman yield?
Yield to Mr. Meadows.
Mr. Chairman, may I finish?
Mr. Cohen,
No says the time.
May I finish my?
Mr. Cohen, he's yielded to me, and so.
I didn't finish, sir, my response.
Listen,
I'm
everything's
asking the
been
chairman,
made.
Mr. Chairman, may I finish my response, please?
I'll let you respond, but answer his question, please.
Mr. Cohen, everything's been made of your lies in the past. I'm concerned about your lies today. Under your testimony just a few minutes ago, to me, You indicated that you had contracts with foreign entities. And yet we have a truth and testimony disclosure form, which requires you to list those foreign contracts for the last 2 years, and you put NA on there. And it's a criminal offense to not have that accurately. So when were you lying? Either in the testimony to me earlier today or when you filled out the form?
Gentleman's time has expired. Mr. Cohen, you may answer his question and then whatever you wanted to say on that.
His question is, unfortunately, I don't have an answer for his question. But as it
Well, no,
relates-
Mr. Chairman.
As
Excuse
it
me.
relates,
The gentleman is out of order. He said he does not have an answer.
Mr. Chairman, when we were in the majority, with all due respect, Mr. Chairman, hold on.
Regular order. The gentleman has just said he doesn't have an answer. And you had already gone over your time.
He's under oath to tell the truth. One of them
Again-
is not accurate,
again,
Mr. Chairman.
You will have time to answer
Mr.
questions.
Chairman, just a question, Mr. Chairman, just a question.
Mr. Raskin.
Mr.
Mr. Raskin.
Mr. Cohen, thank you for your composure today. Our colleagues are not upset because you lied to Congress for the president. They're upset because you stopped lying to Congress for the president. Now, you've described the Trump campaign as a once-in-a-lifetime money-making opportunity, the greatest infomercial of all time, I think you said, and this may be the most trenchant observation of your whole testimony. Do you think the Trump campaign or presidency ever stopped being about making money for the president, his family, and his organization?
yes,
When did it stop being that?
when he won the election.
And what did it become about at that point?
Then it had to be about figuring out what to do here in Washington.
Can you carefully explain to America how the hush money payments to Karen McDougal and Stormy Daniels worked? Can you carefully explain what catch and kill is?
Sure. I received a phone call regarding both Karen McDougal as well as Stormy Daniels, obviously at different times, stating that there were issues that were going to be damaging to Mr. Trump. With the Stormy Daniels, it started in 2011 when she wanted to have something removed from a website. And that was the first time I met Keith David. I spoke with Keith Davidson, her then acting attorney, and we were successful in having it taken down from the website. It wasn't until years later, by around the time of the campaign, did they come back and they ask, what are you going to do now, because she's back on the trail trying to sell the story. At which point in time, David Pecker, on behalf of the National Enquirer, reached out to her and her attorney in order to go take a look at lie detector test that would prove that she was telling the truth. They then contacted me and told me that she was telling the truth, at which point, again, all the time,
She took a lie detector
she
test.
allegedly took a lie detector test and was seen by an employee of the National Enquirer. At which point in time, I went straight into Mr. Trump's office and I explained why this time it's different than another time.
Okay, now when you say different than another time, were there other women paid sexual hush money by Donald Trump or his organization? Was this a standard operating practice?
No.
So you're not aware of any other cases where it had taken place?
I'm not aware of any other case that Mr. Trump paid. So which brings us to the Karen McDougal. He was supposed to pay. He was supposed to pay $125,000 for the life story of Karen McDougal. For whatever the reason may be, he elected not to pay it. David Pecker was very angry because there was also other monies that David had expended on his behalf. Unfortunately, David never got paid back for that either.
So David Pecker had done this in other cases of other mistresses or women?
Other circumstances, yes.
Okay.
Not all of them had to do with women.
Are you aware of anything that the president has done at home or abroad that may have subjected him to or may subject him to extortion or blackmail?
I am not, no.
Okay. Are you aware of any videotapes that may be the subject of extortion or blackmail?
I've heard about these tapes for a long time. I've had many people contact me over the years. I have no reason to believe that that tape exists.
In December 2015, Donald Trump was asked about his relationship with Felix Sater, a convicted felon and real estate developer, and he replied, "Felix Sater, boy, have to even think about it. I'm not that familiar with him." Why did Trump endeavor to hide his relationship with Felix Sater, and what was his relationship?
Well, he certainly had a relationship. Felix was a partner in a company called Bayrock that was involved in the deal of the Trump Soho Hotel, as well as, I believe, the Trump Fort Lauderdale project. Why did he want to distance himself? That's what Mr. Trump does. He distances himself when things go bad for someone. And at that point in time, it was going bad for Mr. Sater.
You said you lied to Congress about Trump's negotiations to build his Moscow tower because he'd made it clear to you that he wanted you to lie. One of the reasons you knew this is because, quote, Mr. Trump's personal lawyers reviewed and edited my statement to Congress about the timing of the Moscow tower negotiations before I gave it. So this is a pretty breathtaking claim, and I just want to get to the facts here. Which specific lawyers reviewed and edited your statement to Congress on the Moscow tower negotiations, and did they make any changes to your statement?
There were changes made, additions. Jay Sekulow, for one.
Were there changes about the timing? The question of...
Gentleman's time has expired. You may answer that question.
There were several changes that were made, including how we were going to handle that message.
Mr.
Which
Grossman,
was...
were you finished?
Yes, the message, of course, being the length of time that the Trump Tower Moscow project stayed and remained alive.
That was one of the changes.
Yes.
Mr. Grossman.
Yeah, first of all, I'd like to clear up something, just a little something that bothers me. You started off your testimony, and you said, I think in response to some question, that President Trump never expected to win. I just want to clarify that I dealt with President Trump several times as he was trying to get Wisconsin. He was always confident. He was working very hard. And this idea that somehow he was just running to raise his profile for some future adventure, at least in my experience, is preposterous. And I always I'll find it offensive when anti-Trump people imply that he just did this on a lark and didn't expect to win. But be that as it may, my first question concerns your relationship with the court. Do you expect, I mean, right now I think you're sentenced to 3 years, correct?
That's correct.
Do you expect any time using this testimony, other testimony, after you get done doing whatever you're going to do this week, do you ever expect to go back and ask for any sort of reduction in sentence?
Yes, there are ongoing investigations currently being conducted that have nothing to do with this committee or Congress that I am assisting in, and it is for the benefit of a Rule 35 motion, yes.
So you expect, and perhaps what you testify here today will affect going back and reducing this, what we think is a relatively light 3-year sentence. You expect to go back and ask for a further reduction?
Based off of my appearance here today?
Well, based upon whatever you do between now and your request for...
The Rule 35 motion is in the complete hands of the Southern District of New York. And the way the Rule 35 motion works is what you're supposed to do is provide them with information that leads to ongoing investigations. I am currently working with them right now on several other issues of investigation that concerns them that they're looking at. If those investigations become fruitful, then there is a possibility for a Rule 35 motion. And I don't know what the benefit in terms of time would be. But this congressional hearing today is not going to be the basis of a Rule 35 motion. I wish it was, but it's not.
I'd like to yield some time to Congressman Jordan.
I yield to the gentleman from North Carolina.
Mr. Cohen, I'm going to come back to the question I asked before with regards to your false statement that you submitted to Congress. On here, it was very clear that it asked for contracts with foreign entities over the last 2 years. Have you had any foreign contract with foreign entities, whether it's Navaris or the Korean airline or Kazakhstan BTA Bank? Your testimony earlier said that you had contracts with them. In fact, you went into detail.
I believe
on
it talks about lobbying. I did no lobbying. On top of that,
in
they
your
are
testimony,
not government.
I'm not asking about lobbying, Mr. Cohen.
They
I'm
are
saying,
not government agencies.
Do you have
privately
foreign
or publicly
contracts?
traded companies.
Do you have foreign contracts?
I currently have no foreign.
Did you have foreign contracts over the last 2 years?
Foreign contracts?
Contracts with foreign entities. Did you have
Yes.
contracts? Yes.
Yes.
Why didn't you put them on the form? It says it's a criminal offense to not put them on this form for the last 2 years. Why did you not do that?
Because those foreign companies that you're referring to are not government companies.
It said non-governmental, Mr. Cohen. You signed it.
They're talking about me as being non-governmental.
And right, it says foreign agency. It says foreign contracts. Do you want us to read it to you?
I read it, and it was reviewed by my counsel, and I am a non-government employee. It was not lobbying, and they are not foreign.
This has nothing to do with lobbying. It says it's a criminal offense to not list all your foreign contracts. That's what it says.
Well, then I'm going to take a look at it before I leave.
No, you've
Hopefully
heard-
I will, and hopefully I will amend it prior to leaving, because that's not the way I read your document.
You know, it's just one more example, Mr. Cohen, of you skirting the truth. Okay, I want to ask one other
Sir,
question.
sir,
One other
that's-
question, Mr. Cohen. It's my time, not yours. Were you advised, or was your counsel advised, to withhold your written testimony to the latest possible date, as John Dean said last night on CNN?
Was it my what?
Were you advised, or was your counsel advised, to withhold your written testimony to this committee at the latest possible date, to get it to this committee at the latest possible date, as John Dean said that he advised you? Yes or no?
No. We were
He never
working-
advised you.
John Dean? I've never spoken with John Dean.
Has he spoken to your attorney?
I don't know. I've never spoken
Well,
to
ask
John
your
Dean.
attorney. He's right
We
there
were
behind
working
you.
last night till 11, 12 o'clock at
You've
night.
known
in
that
order
you've been coming for some time.
You may answer the question. Answer the question.
We were working till 11, 12 o'clock last night to finish everything.
So you were writing it last night, Mr. Cohen?
we were
Don't
making
give me
edits.
that bull.
We were making edits all the way through the night.
Recognize Mr. Ruda.
I'm sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Cohen, in November 2013, President Donald Trump testified under oath in a lawsuit related to the failed real estate project, Trump International Hotel and Tower in Fort Lauderdale. During the deposition, President Trump was asked about his knowledge of Felix Sater, a Russian-born real estate developer and convicted member of the Russian mafia, who, according to press reports, pled guilty for his role in a $40 million stock manipulation scheme. And it's worth noting, as well publicized, the direct relationship between the Russian mafia and the Kremlin. Over the years, President Trump was asked how many times he interacted with convicted Russian mobster Felix Sater. In 2013, President Trump testified that, quote, "Not many. If he were sitting in the room right now, I really wouldn't know what he looked like," unquote. Mr. Cohen, as you previously testified, isn't it true that President Trump knew convicted Russian mobster Felix Sater in 2013 when he made that statement?
Yes.
Isn't it true that because of Mr. Sater's relationship to the Trump organization, that he had an office in the Trump Tower?
And on the 26th floor, Mr. Trump's
And the 26th floor is important. Why?
because it's Mr. Trump's floor.
So he had an office on the same floor as President Trump.
In fact, his office, when he left, became my office.
And isn't it also true that convicted Russian mobster Sater even had business cards indicating that he was a senior advisor to Donald Trump, as reported by the Washington Post?
Yes.
Did convicted Russian mobster Sater pay rent for his office?
No, he did not.
So, based on those facts, isn't it true that President Trump misled at best, or worse, lied under oath?
Yes.
In December 2015, President Trump was asked again about his relationship to convicted Russian mobster Mr. Sater by a reporter for the Associated Press. He stated, quote, "Felix Sater, boy, I have to even think about it," unquote. He added, quote, "I'm not that familiar with him," unquote. Mr. Cohen, where would we find business records that explain the President's relationship to the convicted Russian mobster Felix Sater? Would those be in the Trump Organization's files?
They'd be in the Trump Organization's files. There would be CCs to Bayrock, which was the name of Mr. Sater's company. I suspect on Mr. Sater's email address, possibly hard files in possession of Mr. Sater.
And when you say in possession of the Trump Organization, where?
It depends upon who the attorney was that was working on it. Now it would probably be in a box, off-site. They have storage facility that they put old files.
In addition to convicted Russian mobster Sater, do you know of any other ties to convicted or alleged mobsters President Trump may have?
I am not aware.
Is it true that many people with ties to Russia ultimately bought condos in Trump properties, usually for cash? And if so, how many are we talking? 10, 20, 50?
I'm not, honestly, sir, I'm not aware of any. The statement that you're referring to, I believe, was made by either Eric or Don, and I don't agree with it.
So are you aware of any cash purchases by Russian oligarchs and family members of Trump properties?
I'm not aware of that. I can tell you when you say cash, if you mean walking in with a satchel of rubles, the answer is I've never seen that happen. I've never heard of it. I will tell you when we sold Mr. Trump's property in Palm Beach, the home for $95 million, it came in by wire, and that came from Mr. Rybolov's bank account.
One other question. You also talked about President Trump doing negotiations throughout the campaign regarding the Trump Tower in Moscow. Was he directly involved in those negotiations? And if so, how do you know?
Well, the answer is yes. And as it relates to negotiations, it was merely follow-ups as to what's currently happening, what's happening with Russia, meaning he wanted me to give him a status report. The problem with this is that the project never advanced because they were unable, Mr. Sater was unable to provide me with proof that somebody owned or controlled a piece of property that we can actually build on.
The gentleman's time has expired. Mr. Marsh.
Mr. Cohen, why did Mr. Trump choose to hire you, and why did he trust you with the various tasks that you perform for him?
I don't know, sir. You would have to ask him that question.
Well, we've heard here that you have bad character. You've admitted to that over the years. You have no idea why he chose to hire you.
In 2006, I was asked by Don Jr. to come meet with his father. I did. He then followed up by asking if I would take a look at an issue that was occurring at Trump World Tower with the board. I went ahead and I looked into it, and I found that the statements that the board were making about Mr. Trump were inaccurate. And the reason Don came to me is because I had an apartment there for investment. My parents had an apartment there. My in-laws lived there. Friends of mine, we all bought as a big block from a brokerage company. We got a good price on each unit. And we ultimately turned over the board, and I became actually the treasurer of the board because the out-of-control spending was going to put the building into bankruptcy. And I was proud to say that within a year, we had plus $1 million versus minus 1.3. At the end of the day, Mr. Trump appreciated that, and he tasked me with something else. It was to handle a problem that Don Jr. had created in terms of a business, a license deal, and we resolved that. And then on top of that, the third time, Mr. Trump had asked me to take a look at the third Trump Entertainment Resort Chapter 11 reorganization, because he had a series of questions that he wanted answered. And I read these 2 stacked books, gave him the answers that he needed, and with that, the next time I was sitting in his office, and he asked me if I was happy at the sleepy old firm that I was with. I said yes. He said, would you rather work for me? And I asked if you offer me a job. And he said, yeah. And we negotiated, and I actually never went back to my office.
All right. Well, you've suggested that the president sometimes communicates his wishes indirectly. For example, you said, quote, Mr. Trump did not directly tell me to lie to Congress. That's not how he operates, end quote. Can you explain how he does this?
Sure. It would be no different if I said, that's the nicest looking tie I've ever seen, isn't it? What are you going to do? You're going to fight with him? The answer is no. So you say, yeah, it's the nicest looking tie I've ever seen. That's how he speaks. He doesn't give you questions. He doesn't give you orders. He speaks in a code. And I understand the code because I've been around him for a decade.
And it's your impression that others who work for him understand the code as well?
Most people, yes.
Mr. Cohen, I don't know whether we should believe you today, but I'm going to ask you this one last question. What is the truth that you know President Trump fears most?
That's a tough question, sir. I don't have an answer for that one. What does he fear most?
What's the truth that he fears most? From your perspective. And again, I don't know whether we should leave you here today, but...
You know, it's a tough question, sir. I don't know even how to answer that question.
Let me ask you this. What principles have you chosen to follow in your life? And do you wish to follow different principles now?
I've always tried to be a good person. I've tried to be a great friend. There were many, I think over 40 statements written in my support to the sentencing judge. I have friends who I treat incredibly well that I know for over 40 years, and I treat people after 40 minutes the same exact way. Am I perfect? No. Do I make mistakes? Yes. Have I made mistakes? Absolutely. I'm going to pay the consequences for it. But all I would like to do is be able to get my life back to protect my wife and my children, support and grow old. That's pretty much where I'd like to be.
And you feel you're following a different set of principles now than you followed throughout your life?
I do, and I'm trying. I'm trying very, very hard. I thank you for your questions. Some of the other ones really make it difficult to try to, show some redemption. But I am trying. I am trying.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Hill. Ms. Hill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to mention really quick a clarification on the truth and testimony form. The mention was around whether it talks about foreign entities at all. And the question is, in fact, whether witnesses have any contracts or payments originating with a foreign government. It does not cover all foreign entities, just foreign government entities. So, Mr. Cohen, what I'd like to ask you to do is review this issue over lunch with your attorneys. And if you need to amend your form, we ask that you do that before the conclusion of today's hearing. Also, I represent a purple district. I did not come here for partisan bickering. In fact, I actively wanted to avoid it. So when I ask these questions today, it is not as someone who has a vendetta against the president. It's as someone who comes from generations of service members who swore an oath to obey the orders of the President of the United States, and who, along with myself and every single other person up here, swore to uphold and defend the Constitution of the United States. My forefathers served their country, they served their commander-in-chief, and they served the idea that America is free and just, and that the law of the land rules us all, especially those in the highest levels of our government. So I ask these questions to help determine whether our very own president committed felony crimes while serving in the Oval Office, including efforts to conceal payments that were intended to mislead the public and influence the outcome of an election. I hope to God that is not the case. So, Mr. Cohen, on January 22nd, 2018, just days after the Wall Street Journal broke the story that Mr. Cohen paid $130,000 to Stephanie Clifford to silence her during the 2016 presidential campaign, a nonprofit watchdog called Common Cause filed a complaint with the Department of Justice and FEC, alleging the payment to Ms. Clifford may have represented an illegal in-kind contribution to the Trump campaign. I ask that their complaint be entered into the record. On February 13th, 2018, Mr. Cohen, you sent a statement to the reporters that said, quote, I used my own personal funds to facilitate a payment of $130,000 to Ms. Stephanie Clifford, and neither the Trump Organization nor the Trump campaign was party to the transaction with Ms. Clifford, and neither reimbursed me for the payment either directly or indirectly. Was the statement false?
The statement is not false. I purposefully left out Mr. Trump individually from that statement
Okay. Why did you say it that way?
because that's what was discussed to do between myself, Mr. Trump, and Alan Weisselberg.
So it was carefully worded.
Yes, ma'am.
Great. Mr. Cohen, a reporter for the magazine Vanity Fair has reported that she interviewed you the very next day on February 14th, 2018, about the payment and reimbursement. And she wrote, quote, "Last February 14th, I interviewed Cohen in his office about the statement he gave the FEC in which he said Trump didn't know about the Stormy payment or reimburse him for it. Do you recall this meeting with the reporter?"
I do.
The reporter also wrote, "Trump called while I was there. I couldn't hear much, but he wanted to go over what the public messaging would be." Is that accurate?
It is.
Did the president call you while you were having a meeting with the reporter?
Yes.
Did the president call you to coordinate on public messaging about the payments to Ms. Clifford's in or around February 2018?
Yes.
What did the president ask or suggest that you say about the payments or reimbursements?
He was not knowledgeable of these reimbursements, and he wasn't knowledgeable of my actions.
He asked you to say that.
Yes, ma'am.
Great. In addition to the personal check for $35,000 in July 2017, is there additional corroborating evidence that Mr. Trump, while a sitting president of the United States, directly reimbursed you hush money as part of a criminal scheme to violate campaign finance laws?
There are 11 checks that I received for the year. The reason why 11, because, as I stated before, one had 2 checks.
And you have copies of all of
And
those?
I can get copies. I'd have to go to the bank.
So we will
Yes.
be able to get copies of all 11 checks that Mr. Trump provided to you as part of this criminal scheme?
It's either from his personal account, as what was demonstrated in the exhibit, or it would come from the Donald J. Trump account, the trust account.
Thank you, Mr. Cohen. I yield back the remainder of my time.
Mr. Gibbs.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, I've just been sitting here. I'm new to the committee. I'm not an attorney. Sometimes, Mr. Chairman, your answers, you're either competent or are a liar. I think maybe I could be a better attorney. I don't know. I'm looking through this. You come in here and you rail on the President of the United States, Commander-in-Chief, while he's over across the Pacific Ocean trying to negotiate a deal to make this world safer. And, Mr. Chairman, just having this committee at this time when the Commander-in-Chief's out of the country is just I think, is a new president. But you call him a racist, a cheat, and you know, you're attacking his character. And I've been with the president a little bit, I didn't see that in the president. I see a president who's very sincere, who's trying to make this country better for every American. And for you to come in here and do that, this is repentance on your part, is really unbelievable. Real repentance would be go serve your time and don't come back here and make allegations towards a man that you can't substantiate. Now, I'm looking here from the remarks from the prosecutor of the Southern District of New York. False statements to Bank 3, which Cohen pleaded guilty, was far from an isolated event. It was one of the long series of self-serving lies Cohen told in numerous financial institutions. Earlier in your testimony, I think I heard you say that only there was a home equity loan, but apparently the prosecutors in New York think that there's other financial things that you did. You also, they said, managed to commit a series of crimes, all withholding himself out as a licensed attorney and upstanding member of the bar. Also, the Southern District prosecutor said that, wrote that your consciousness of wrongdoing is fleeting, that your remorse is minimal, and that your instinct is to blame others is strong. So I'm kind of left here. Why? You worked for the president for 10 years before he was president. If you have any sense of integrity that you're trying to tell us you have now, and it was that bad, why didn't you leave? You weren't stuck there for financial reasons. You had ways to leave. You were an attorney. And so that's just kind of, you know, the president's working tirelessly, and you come and make these allegations, and you could have left any time you want. It looks like to me you're trying to save face. And with the other questions that came out here was, looks like to me you're going to have a very lucrative deal at some point in your life, because you don't look like you're close to retirement, but you're going to have some type of lucrative deal. And so one of my questions is, and it's come up a little bit, talks with you and your attorney, and there's been talks about members of Congress and staff, and you said there was some discussions. Was any of those discussions that you or your attorneys had with members of Congress or staff or prosecutors to get considerations to favor or other considerations to you or your family in the future?
No, the conversations were about the topics, and because there were things that originally we could not speak about at the request of whether it was the special counsel's office or the Southern District or any of the other agencies, including the House Select Intel or the Senate Select Intel. Sir, just for your personal edification here, I was asked to come here. Your chairman sent a letter to Mr. Davis, and I accepted, so I'm here voluntarily. And
No, I understand that.
Sir,
but
and if you believe that I'm
I
here...
understand, I think it's a political theater.
Sir, if you believe it's not political theater for me, and I take no pleasure in saying anything negative about Mr. Trump. You've met him for a short period of time. I've been with him for over a decade. I've traveled with him internationally. I've spent dinners with him. It doesn't make me feel good about what's going on here. And as far as saving face, I'm not sure how being in front of the world, being called a
Well,
tax cheat,
this world
being-
today, with these lucrative book deals
None
and
of-
movies that come about, I think you'll be pretty good in about 5 years. I yield the rest of my time to the chairman, ranking member.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. Earlier you said you started the campaign?
That's correct. In 2011,
You started the campaign for President of the United States for Donald Trump?
I certainly did, sir.
Now that's news.
ShouldTrumpRun.com.
Wow.
2011 was my idea. I saw a document in the newspaper that said, who'd you vote for in 2012? 6% of the
Michael
people
Cohen.
said,
Michael
Cohen.
Cohen.
6% of the
Michael
people
Cohen,
turned
the
around and
first
said they'd vote for Donald
reason
Trump.
Donald Trump is president is because
So I
Michael
brought
Cohen
it into
started?
his office, and I said to him, Mr. Trump, take a look at this. He goes, well, wouldn't that be great? And with that is where it all started.
Yeah. Okay. Like I'm sure he had never thought of anything like that until you came.
No,
in.
I didn't
Let me ask
say
you
that
one
he
question.
didn't
I got
think
8
about it.
seconds. I got 8 seconds. What did you talk to Mr. Schiff about?
I spoke to Mr. Schiff about topics that were going to be raised at the upcoming hearing.
Whoa. Not just what time to show up, actually what you're going to talk about?
The gentleman's time has expired.
Wow.
Mr. Sarbanes. Mr. Sarbanes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Cohen. I know the other side is suggesting that you are an incorrigible liar and that you're lying here today. I can't think of anything you have to gain at this point from lying. I mean, they talk about book deals and other things that you want to do, but I see a lot more that you could lose by telling the truth today, given the threats and other things that have been made against you and your family. So that's how I'm interpreting it. And of course, you brought documents with you as well to bolster the credibility of your testimony. I did want to go back to an earlier line of questioning regarding the preparation of your testimony before you came before the Intelligence Committee. You've talked about a meeting at the White House where the testimony was being reviewed. I think you said that there was at least one White House attorney, Jay Sekulow, who was there, and you acknowledged that there were some edits that were made to your testimony. So on that topic, who at the White House reviewed your testimony?
I don't know the answer to that. The document was originally created by myself, along with my attorney at the time from McDermott, Will and Emery, and there was a joint defense agreement, so the document circulated around. I believe it was also reviewed by Abby Lowell, who represents Ivanka and Jared Kushner.
Why did you provide the testimony to the White House?
It was pursuant to the joint defense agreement that we were all operating under.
Mm-hmm. What were the edits that came back substantively on the testimony?
I'm sorry, I don't know, sir. I'd have to take a look at the document.
Uh-huh. Did you have a reaction to why there might not have been, in a sense, a protest to what was going to be false testimony that was going to be provided?
No, sir, because the goal was to stay on message. It's just limit the relationship whatsoever with Russia. It was short. There's no Russian contacts. There's no Russian collusion. There's no Russian deals. That's the message. That's the same message that existed well before my need to come and testify.
So it's an example of where this idea, this mentality of you toe the line, whatever the storyline or the narrative of the day or the month or the year is going to be, you toe that line whether it results in false testimony or not.
I towed the party line, and I'm now suffering, and I'm going to continue to suffer for a while along with my family as a result of it, so yes.
Let me switch gears quickly before my time expires. And you may not have direct knowledge of some of these things, but you're offering us some very helpful perspective on how the Trump world operates. And frankly, another reason I find your testimony fairly compelling and credible is because a lot of the things you're describing, a lot of the behavior you're describing, is very consistent with what we all see every single day. So it's not a leap for us to arrive in the same place of perspective that you presented. I'm interested in some of the activities around the inaugural committee, the inauguration of the president. There was an article that appeared in ProPublica, it's a watchdog group, about some negotiation on pricing of things at the Trump hotel, where it looks like the rental that was being quoted was substantially, even double what you would expect to pay according to what the market should bear. And so in a sense, the Trump hotel was upcharging to the inaugural
Even I couldn't afford to stay there.
committee. Yeah. And so I'm just curious, do you have a sense of whether that kind of a practice is something that is consistent or inconsistent? Is it possible that that kind of upcharging could be done inside a Trump operation?
It did happen. And
Gentleman's time is
all
expired.
what I can say to you is I wasn't part of the inaugural committee. I raised a lot of money for the inauguration, but I was not part of it, and there was a lot of things in that that issue is something that's also, obviously, we've read about in the paper, being investigated at the current moment.
Thank you.
Mr. Higgins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Cohen, it's on my heart to tell you, sir, that, and I'm sorry for what your family is going through. I feel for your family. The word tells us clearly that a man's mouth is his destruction and his lips are the snare of his soul. And I see you, a man trapped in that. However, I must tell you that I've arrested several thousand men, and you remind me of many of them. The ones that immediately become humble and remorseful at the time they're actually booked, and while they're incarcerated, they're quite penitent, and then return to their former selves when they're back on the street. So, respectful to your family and what they're going through, I owe you the honesty to tell you that that's my sense of you, good sir. I'm going to give you another opportunity to respond to what you brushed off earlier regarding your own statement during his testimony from C-SPAN notation at 2 hours and 50 seconds in. You stated regarding your credibility that you're being accused of having no credibility, that it is exactly for that reason I spent the last week searching boxes to find the information that I did so that you don't have to take my word for it. I want you to look at the documents and make your own decisions. Now, the documents you're referring to, Mr. Cohen, are the documents that you submitted with your testimony today. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Do you believe those documents to be worthy of evidence for this oversight hearing today?
I leave that to you to decide.
And I ask you again, sir, and please don't be incredulous, this is a serious question. Where are those boxes that contain documents worthy of evidence to be presented to Congress, and why have they not been turned over to investigating authorities looking into some of the many criminal activities that you're allegedly cooperating in? Where are these boxes? Who knows of the, where is this treasure of evidence?
The boxes that I'm referring to were boxes that were in my law office when the FBI entered and seized documents.
Mr. Chairman, I
When
would
I
hope
was
that the
moving-
investigating authorities have noted what the gentleman had just stated, and that actions be taken for those boxes to be seized and reviewed based upon proper warrants signed by a sitting judge. You noted earlier today, Mr. Cohen, quite incredulously, one of my colleagues asked you regarding the television deal. You expressed wonderment that your predicament could possibly get you on television. It certainly got you on television today, has it not, sir?
Sir, I was on television representing Mr. Trump going back into 2011.
Well, I didn't know who you were until today, really, until the FBI raided your home. Most of Americans didn't know who you were. How many attorneys do you think Mr. Trump has had through the course of his career? Quite a few, I imagine. You're just one that's in a trap right now, and I understand you're trying to get out of it. You're in a bind. But I ask you, good sir, have you discussed film and book deals with your stated current attorney, Mr. Davis, Lanny Davis?
With Mr. Davis?
Yes.
No. But I have been approached by many people who are looking to do book deals, movie deals, and so on. So
Yes,
the answer
you're
to
right
that
as
is
an
yes.
American, but it leads me back to my instinct that compares you to many of the men that I've arrested during the course of my career. Mr. Chairman,
With all
I'm
due
saddened
respect, sir,
that our primary hearing to introduce the Oversight Committee, the 116th Congress of the American people, has manifested in the way that it obviously is. This is an attempt to injure our president and lay some sort of soft cornerstone for future impeachment proceedings. This is the full intent of the majority. I yield my remaining 30 seconds to the ranking member.
Mr. Cohen, earlier you said the United States Southern District of New York is not accurate in that statement.
I'm sorry, say that again.
Earlier you said the United States Southern District of New York Attorney's Office, that statement is not accurate. You said it's not a lie, you said it's not accurate. Can you stand by that?
Yes, I did not want a role in the new administration.
So the court's wrong?
Sir, can I finish,
Sure.
please? I got exactly the role that I wanted. There is no shame in being personal attorney to the president. I got exactly what I wanted. I asked Mr. Trump for that job, and he gave it to me.
All I'm asking, if I could, and I appreciate it, Mr. Chairman, you're saying that statement from the Southern District of New York attorneys is wrong.
I'm saying I didn't write it, and it's not accurate.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Welch.
Thank you. One of the most significant events in the last presidential campaign, of course, was the dump of emails stolen from the Democratic National Committee, dumped by WikiLeaks. Mr. Cohen, during your opening statement, which was at the height of the election, you testified you were actually meeting with Donald Trump in July 2016 when Roger Stone happened to call and tell Mr. Trump that he had just spoken to Julian Assange. Is that correct?
That is correct.
All right. And you said that Mr. Assange told Mr. Trump about an upcoming, quoting your opening statement, quote, massive dump of emails that would damage Hillary Clinton's campaign. Wow. So I want to ask you about Roger Stone's phone call to the president. First of all, was that on speakerphone? Is that what you indicated?
Yes, so Mr. Trump has a black speakerphone that sits on his desk. He uses it quite often because with all the number of phone calls he gets.
Now, in January of this year, 2019, the New York Times asked President Trump if he ever spoke to Roger Stone about these stolen emails, and President Trump answered, and I quote, "No, I didn't. I never did." Was that statement by President Trump true?
No, it's not accurate.
And can you please describe for us, to the best of your recollection, you were present, exactly what Mr. Stone said to Mr. Trump.
It was a short conversation, and he said, Mr. Trump, I just want to let you know that I just got off the phone with Julian Assange, and in a couple of days, there's going to be a massive dump of emails that's going to severely hurt the Clinton campaign.
And was Mr. Trump and Mr. Stone aware of where those emails came from?
That I'm not aware of.
Did Mr. Trump ever suggest then or later to call the FBI to report this breach?
He never expressed that to me.
Did the president at that time or ever since, in your knowledge, indicate an awareness that this conduct was wrong?
No.
The reason I ask is because on July 22nd, on the eve of the Democratic Convention, WikiLeaks published, as you know, the 20,000 leaked internal DNC emails. Could your meeting with Mr. Trump have been before that date?
Yes.
So Mr. Trump was aware of the upcoming dump before it actually happened?
Yes.
Right. And is there any record?
Though, sir, I don't know whether he knew or not, and I don't believe he did, what the sum and substance of the dump was going to be, only that there was going to be a dump of emails.
And he was aware of that before the dump occurred, correct?
Yes, sir.
All right. And are there any records that would corroborate the day of this meeting, calendars perhaps?
I'm not in possession, but I believe, again, this is part of the special counsel, and they probably best suited to corroborate that information.
Was anyone else present in the room during the call?
I don't recall for this one, no, sir.
Is there anyone else the committee should talk to about the president's knowledge of the WikiLeaks email dump?
Well, again, when he called, Rona Graff yelled out to Mr. Trump, Rogers on line 1, which was regular practice.
And that's his assistant?
That's his, yes.
All right. And during a news conference on July 27th, 2016, then candidate Trump publicly appealed to Russia to hack Hillary Clinton's emails and make them public. He stated, and I quote, Russia, if you're listening, I hope you're able to find the 30,000 emails that are missing. Now, going back to Mr. Stone's phone call to the president, do you recall if Mr. Trump had knowledge of the WikiLeaks dump at the time of his direct appeal to Russia?
I am not.
But the call with Mr. Stone, you believe, was before
Yes.
this 27th?
Yes, I'm sorry. If you're, I thought you were talking about a different set of documents that got dumped. So I was in Mr. Trump's office, it was either July 18th or 19th, and yes, he went ahead. I don't know if the 35,000 or 30,000 emails was what he was referring to, but he certainly had knowledge.
All right, thank you. Just
Yes,
one
sir.
last question. Mr. Raskin had been asking you some questions, and one of the things in your answer was that Mr. Pecker expended other monies to protect Mr. Trump. Can you elaborate on what some of those other activities were?
Sure. There was the story about Mr. Trump having a love child with an employee, and actually the husband of that employee works for the company as well. And there was a elevator operator who claims that he overheard the conversation taking place between one of Mr. Trump's other executives and somebody, and he ended up paying like $15,000 in order to buy that story to find out whether it was true or not. And that's just one example of things that David had done over the years. It was the reason why in the recording, when David was looking to become the CEO of Time magazine, we were concerned about, we'll call it the treasure trove of documents that had been created over the years, that if he left, somebody could open up the key to a drawer and find all this information. So we were going to look to buy all of those life rights and so on.
Gentleman's time expired. Mr. Norman.
Cohen, thank you for testifying. I join Congressman Higgins in feeling for your family. They have no part in this. You know, I've heard all the testimony, and I'm trying to decide what Clay's trying to decide. Are you really sorry for what you did, or you just got caught? And the thing that amazed me is that In your opening statement, which, let me quote, last fall, I pled guilty in federal court to felonies for the benefit of, at the direction of, and in coordination with individual one. Was that President?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Your crimes were of your own to benefit yourself.
Some of them, yes.
No, go through all the ones with the real estate, with the banks. On your HELOC loan, you failed to disclose more than $20 million in debt. You failed to disclose $70,000 in monthly payments. On your $14 million line of credit, you failed to disclose that you had drawn on that. So this was all for yourself. This wasn't for the benefit of President Trump. This was to benefit Michael Cohen. So that's my question. Did you just get caught? And you worked for this man for 10 years, Mr. Cohen. You came in here with these, he's a con man. He's a cheat. This is the very man that, didn't you wiretap him illegally? Did you not wiretap President Trump without his knowledge?
I did record Mr. Trump in a conversation, yes.
Is that lawyer-client privilege? Is that something that an honest guy would do, an honest lawyer?
I actually never thought that this was going to be happening and that recording even existed. I had forgotten.
But you did it.
Yes, I did.
Have you ever...
I had a reason for doing it.
What was your reason?
Because I knew he wasn't going to pay that money, and David Pecker had already chewed me out on multiple occasions regarding other monies that he expended.
But this is a man that you trusted, you take a bullet for, you secretly recorded. Let me ask you this, Mr. Cohen. Have you legally or illegally recorded other clients?
I have recordings of people, yes.
Legally or illegally?
I believe that they're legal.
Did you tell them?
In New York State, you don't have to do that.
So you didn't tell them?
No, I did not.
Okay.
Sometimes I also use the recordings for contemporaneous note-taking instead of writing it down. I find it easier.
If the shoe were reversed, would you like your trusted lawyer recording you?
I probably would not, no.
No, sir. It's untrustworthy. It's something people just would not do. Now, your bank loans that I just ran down, did you ever default on any of these loans?
No, sir.
So the bank didn't take any loss?
No bank has. I am not in default. I've never filed a bankruptcy. The HELOC you're referring to, I replaced that from a different HELOC, paid it off. I owe no banks any money.
How about your medallion taxi cab today? Did you have to sell that?
Well, the ones in Chicago, yes, I do have to sell. However, New York, the answer is no, I don't. And the industry is going through a major correction because of ride sharing. It's changed a lot of things.
The value of it has?
Yes, sir.
Right. So no bank, would the banks give you a loan again based on your record?
Actually, they did. They did. Yes. The bank actually redid and they refinanced the entire package.
Currently?
Post this, yes.
Okay. Have they never had to do a loan loss reserve for the projected losses?
I don't know what they did, but it's still the same amount.
Well,
I didn't get the benefit of it, no, sir.
Most likely they did. I was on an audit committee.
They may have done that, sir, but that's for their own banking, not for me.
No, it's by law.
My
They have to, if they suspect you of lying, which you admitted to, if they suspect you of maybe not being able to make a loan payment, they have to have a loan loss reserve that's 125% of what you, if it's $20 million, they have to post in their account $20 million plus. So they get no interest on it. And you know who pays for that? The American public who deals with that bank.
Yes, but, sir, I'm not in default, and I'm current on each and every one of those medallion loans. And I've never owed any money to First Republic Bank. In fact, at the time that I had the HELOC, I had more cash sitting in that same bank than the HELOC and my mortgage combined.
Have you ever been to Prague?
I've never been to Prague.
Never have?
I've never been to the Czech Republic.
You'll balance my time.
Ms. Spear.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Cohen. On page 5 of your statement, you say, and I quote, "You need to know that Mr. Trump's personal lawyers reviewed and edited my statement to Congress about the timing of the Moscow Tower negotiations. Who were those attorneys?
Jay Sekulow from the White House?
Yes.
Jay Sekulow, I believe Abby Lowell as well.
And you have a copy of your original statement that you can provide to the committee?
I can try to get that for you.
All right, if you would do that. The letter of intent for the Moscow Tower was in the fall of 2015, correct?
Correct.
Was there an expiration date on that letter of intent?
There was no expiration
So it
date.
could technically still be in effect today.
Oh, no, it's been terminated.
It has been terminated.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Did Mr. Trump tell you to offer Vladimir Putin a free penthouse?
No, ma'am.
So where
That
does
was
that come
that was Felix Sater. It was a marketing stunt that he spoke about.
So Felix Sater had suggested to you that Mr. Trump offer a penthouse to Mr. Putin.
Yes, because it would certainly drive up the price per square foot. No different than in any condo where they start listing celebrities that live in the property.
In 2016, did you travel to Europe?
Yes,
Did you meet with persons associated with the Moscow Tower project?
no.
It was for personal? Or?
Personal. My daughter was studying at Queen Mary in London.
So you did not meet with any Russians?
No.
There is an elevator tape that has been referenced as a catch and kill product. It was evidently of Mr. Trump and a woman, presumably Mrs. Trump, is that correct?
Are we talking about in Moscow or the Trump Tower elevator tape?
There's an elevator tape that went up for auction, ostensibly in 2016, is
Yes,
that correct?
I've heard about this.
And who was on that tape?
It's Mr. Trump with Melania.
And what happened in that tape?
The story goes that he struck Melania while in that elevator because there's a camera inside, which I'm not so sure. Actually, I'm certain it's not true. I've heard about that tape for years. I've known 4 or 5 different people, including folks from AMI, who have
But there was some
claimed-
tape that went up for auction, correct?
I don't believe that auction was real, and I don't believe Mr. Trump ever struck Mrs. Trump, ever. I don't believe it.
And are you aware of anyone purchasing that tape then?
I don't believe it was ever
So you never
purchased.
saw this tape?
No, ma'am, and I know several people who went to go try to purchase it for catch and kill purpose. It doesn't exist.
right.
Mr. Trump would never, in my opinion, that's not
Good to
something
know,
that he
good
is
to
not.
know. Is there a love child?
There is not, to the best of my knowledge.
So you would pay off someone to not
It wasn't me, ma'am.
report-
It was AMI. It was David Pecker.
So he paid off someone about a love child that doesn't exist.
Correct. It was about $15,000.
Okay. How many times did Mr. Trump ask you to threaten an individual or entity on his behalf?
Quite a few times.
50 times?
More.
100 times?
More.
200 times?
More.
500 times?
Probably. Over the 10 years.
Over the 10 years, he asked you,
And when you say threaten, I'm talking with litigation or an argument with
intimidation.
a nasty reporter that is writing an article.
What do you know about, let's go to your tapes. You said there's probably 100 tapes,
Voice recordings,
voice recordings. And will you make them available to the committee?
if you would really like them.
Did Mr.
You
Trump
have to,
tape
don't you
conversations?
have to gavel that, sir?
We would.
Sorry.
Mr. Trump, did Mr. Trump tape any conversations?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
Were you involved in the $25 million settlement to Trump University?
I had a role in that, yes.
Who paid the settlement?
I believe it was Mr. Trump. I don't know the answer to that.
You don't know the answer, but you were involved in the
Yes, in a
negotiations?
different aspect.
There's some reference to a businessman in Kansas being involved in that. Are you familiar with that?
I'm not familiar with that, no.
All right. Finally, in my 13 seconds left, what do you want your children to know?
That I'm sorry for everything, and I'm sorry for the pain that I've caused them. And I wish I can go back in time.
Thank you. I yield back.
Young lady's time has expired. To the members of the committee, before we go to Ms. Miller, so that you can properly plan. There's a vote apparently coming up in about 10 to 20 minutes. And what we will do is we will recess, and we will come back, listen up, 30 minutes after the last vote begins. Got that? Not it ends. 30 minutes after it begins, and we'll do that promptly. All right? All right, Ms. Miller.
I am very disappointed to have you in front of this committee today. Quite frankly, this isn't the reason the people of West Virginia sent me to Congress. I find this hearing not in the best interest of the American people. This is another political game with the sole purpose of discrediting the president. If it was not already obvious, there are members here with a singular goal in Congress: to impeach President Trump. To achieve this goal, they will waste not only precious taxpayer dollars, but also time in this committee and Congress as a whole. In fact, they will go so far as to bring a convicted felon in front of our committee. We are supposed to take what you say, Mr. Cohen, at this time about President Trump as the truth. But you're about to go to prison for lying. How can we believe anything you say? The answer is we can't. This begs the question, why are those in the majority holding this hearing? I am appalled. We could be focused on actual issues that are facing America, like border security, neonatal abstinence syndrome, or improving our nation's crumbling infrastructure. Instead, the Democrats are trying to grasp at straws. Let's talk about this witness. From his sentencing hearing in the Southern District of New York, Judge Pauley stated, Mr. Cohen pled guilty to a veritable smorgasbord of fraudulent conduct, willful tax evasion, making false statements to a financial institution, illegal campaign contributions, and making false statements to Congress. Each of the crimes involved deception, and each appears to have been motivated by personal greed and ambition. This is who we have in front of us today in our committee, someone who is about to be sent to prison for 3 years for evading his taxes, deceiving a financial institution, lying to Congress, among other counts. One of the most appalling facts about this hearing is that Mr. Cohen has used his experiences with President Trump both before and after he was elected for his own greed and profit. I'd like some yes or no answers. Isn't it true you tried to sell a book about your time with President Trump entitled Trump Revolution: From the Tower to the White House, Understanding Donald J. Trump?
Yes, that happened early on when I was still even part, I believe, of the RNC.
And this book deal, which you had with Hatchet Books, was worth around $500,000. Isn't that correct?
No, more, ma'am.
How much more?
I think it was about $750.
Wow. Mr. Cohen,
I did turn it down.
given that you continue to profit from publicly discussing your time with Mr. Trump, I worry that this committee hearing the majority has given you will only serve as a platform for you to continue to lie and sensationalize and exaggerate wherever it suits you. Do you plan to pursue another book deal about your experiences?
Yes.
I would presume this book would be a little different than your latest pitch, but your new angle might please some new fans. Anything to sell books. Mr. Chairman, we've canceled hearings on child separation and on other issues that are close to my heart for this media circus. What a waste of time and money for a man who has gladly exploited the name of the president to promote his own name and fill his own pockets. It pains me that we are sitting here adding another chapter to his book. Thank you, and I yield the remainder of my time to Mr. Jordan.
I thank the gentlelady for yielding. Earlier, Mr. Cohen, the gentlelady from California talked about this this tape.
I'm sorry, sir, I can't hear you.
Earlier, the gentlelady from California talked about this tape, this elevator tape that you said does not exist.
That's correct. I do not believe it exists.
But is it also your testimony that the Trump team was willing to pay to make sure a story about a non-existent tape never became public?
No, sir, that's not what I said.
They were willing to stop a false tape?
We learned that this tape was potentially on the market and that it existed. And so what we did is exactly what we did with all the other catch and kill. We looked for it. And if, in fact, that it did exist, we would have tried to stop it. That's what I would have done.
False tape.
But it's a false tape. I've never
Got it.
heard it, and I can assure you one thing about Mr. Trump. Many things, he would never, ever do something like that. I don't see it.
Ms. Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Cohen, I'd like to ask you more about the details of the $130,000 payment you made to Stephanie Clifford, the adult film actress known as Stormy Daniels, in order to purchase her silence shortly before the 2016 elections. First, according to documents filed by federal prosecutors in New York, you created a shell company called Essential Consultants, LLC. Is that correct?
It's correct.
And you created the company for the purpose of making the payment to Ms. Clifford. Is that correct?
Amongst other things, yes.
You then used a home equity line of credit to fund the account in the name of Essential Consultants, LLC. Is that correct?
That's correct.
You then wired $130,000 to the attorney representing Ms. Clifford at that time and wrote in the memo field for the wire the word, quote, retainer. Is that correct?
Correct.
Can you tell us why you decided to use this complicated process to make this payment?
Well, starting an LLC is not a sophisticated means. LLC, you call up a company, you pay for it, and they open it for you. And the reason that I used the home equity line of credit as opposed to cash that I had in the same exact bank was I didn't want my wife to know about it because she handles all of the banking. And I didn't want her coming to me and asking me what was the $130,000 for. And then I was going to be able to move money from one account to the other and to pay it off because I didn't want to have to explain to her what that payment was about. I sent it to the IOLA account, the interest on a lawyer's account, to Keith Davidson, California, Ms. Daniels' attorney. He would hold it in escrow until such time as I received the executed NDA, non-disclosure agreement.
Did Mr. Trump know you were going through this process to hide the payment?
Yes.
Why not just use Mr. Trump's personal or company bank account to make the payment? Why was the distraction so important besides you not wanting your wife to know?
What his concern was that there would be a check that has his very distinct signature onto it. And even after she cashed the check, all you need to do is make a photocopy of it, and it's kind of proof positive on exactly what took place. So here, the goal was to keep him far away from it as possible.
Can anyone corroborate what you have shared with us?
Absolutely.
And that is?
Keith Davidson, Alan Weisselberg, President Trump.
Okay. Now let's talk about the reimbursement. According to federal prosecutors, and I quote, after the election, Cohen sought reimbursement for election-related expenses, including the $130,000 payment. Prosecutors stated that you, and I quote, presented an executive of the company with a copy of a bank statement reflecting the $130,000 wire transfer. Is that accurate?
That is accurate.
Do you still have a copy of that bank statement?
Yes, it's actually made part of the exhibit.
So you will provide it to the committee?
Yes, ma'am.
According to federal prosecutors, executives at the company then, and I quote, agreed to reimburse Cohen by adding $130,000 and $50,000, grossing up that amount to $360,000 for tax purposes, and adding a $60,000 bonus such that Cohen would be paid $420,000 in total. Executives of the company decided to pay the $420,000 in monthly installments of $35,000 over the course of a year. Is that accurate?
That is accurate.
What was the purpose of grossing up the amounts, essentially doubling what you had paid to Ms. Clifford and others?
Because if you pay $130,000 and you live in New York where you have a 50% tax bracket, in order to get your $130 back, you have to have $260. Otherwise, if he gave me back $130, I would only, then I'd be out $65,000.
What was the purpose of spreading reimbursements to you over the 12 monthly installments?
That was in order to hide what the payment was. I obviously wanted the money in one shot. I would have preferred it that way. But in order to be able to put it onto the books, Alan Weisselberg made the decision that it should be paid over the 12 months so that it would look like a retainer.
And did Ms. Trump know about this reimbursement method?
Oh, he knew about everything, yes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Cohen. So the president not only knew about the payments, he knew and helped to hide the payments and the reimbursements to you.
Yeah, we discussed it. Everything had to go through Mr. Trump, and it had to be approved by Mr. Trump.
And now you're going to prison, and he's...
And I am going to prison, yes, ma'am.
I yield back.
If I
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Earlier, you
Yes, I yield my time. Oh, she did.
earlier you said, I'm assuming New York's a one-party consent state. One person can record the other one without it being illegal.
Correct.
But you also were a member of the New York Bar.
I was, yes.
How would you rate recording clients in the ethical realm of being a lawyer?
I know it's not illegal, and
I'm not asking if it's illegal. I'm asking if it's ethical.
I don't know. That we'd have to leave the judgment of the Bar Association.
So, well, I think every other lawyer in here knows exactly where it is in the ethical standard. When you said you had 100 tapes, were any of those tapes of other clients?
Yes.
And I think this is amazing. I really do. Did any of them waive privilege?
No.
So 5 minutes ago, in the middle of our hearing on oversight, you just immediately responded that you would hand over tapes to this committee without any of your previous clients waiving privilege.
I'm not the only one in possession of those documents. Those documents are in the hands of all of the
Whoever else is
agencies
in
already.
charge of those documents is not my concern. My concern is, I know lawyers that would go to jail before they would violate attorney-client privilege, and in a matter of a second, you just said, absolutely, I will turn those over.
Just trying to cooperate, sir.
At the expense of clients who have never waived privilege.
They're already in the hands, sir, of all of the agencies. I didn't ask people.
What
to
law
take my
enforcement determines to do is something, and what you determine to do is something. Client privilege and attorney trust accounts are about the two most sacred things that you can ever do in your entire career as a lawyer. And
by the
in
way, sir,
a matter of a second.
And the tape with Mr. Trump, the
Completely.
reason that it's out there is because Rudy Giuliani waived the privilege.
I'm not talking about Rudy Giuliani. I'm talking about you. And I don't know who's on those tapes. Only you know who is on those tapes. There's 100 of them.
The other one is also subject to an ongoing.
My point is, in a matter of a second, 1 second, you took absolutely no calculation of your role as those clients' counselor, the role that plays in privacy, and in the role that plays in a solemn vow you took when you passed the bar, when you signed on to the bar, until recently were a member of the bar, and you just immediately said, if it helps me out in the today in front of TV, yes, absolutely, Mr. Chairman, you can have that. And I think, and that just goes into what we're going to talk about next briefly. We talk about these indictments on tax fraud and bank fraud as if they are isolated incidents. But they're not isolated incidents of bad judgment. These were intricate, elaborate lies that that needed to be held with constant deceptions of banks, businesses, associates, accountants, potentially your family. You received over $2.4 million in personal loans from taxi medallion company 1. And those were loan payments for a business loan, correct?
No, sir.
You weren't receiving those. Okay, go ahead.
Those were payments that were made by the management company that was operating the medallions.
To you.
To me.
So, and those were deposited into your personal account, or in some instances, your wife's account.
It was deposited into the joint checking account of my wife and I, that's located at the base of the building that we reside in.
And were those disclosed on your tax returns?
They were not disclosed on my tax return.
And in fact, when your accountant talked to you about those deposits, you told them you wouldn't pay for a memo that you didn't ask to be done?
That's inaccurate.
So the
that's
sentencing court in New York has it wrong?
Okay. I don't know what Mr. Getzel wrote, my accountant. There are a series of issues regarding his memo, anyway, including the fact he's almost directing me in an earlier memo to commit fraud. But putting all that aside with Jeff Getzel, the answer to that is I pled guilty, all right? And I made my mistake, and I'm going, as I've said 100 times now, right? I'm not so sure why this singular attack on my taxes, if you want to look at them, I'm more than happy to show them to you.
If the chairman will give me 20 minutes, I got plenty of other things to talk about.
Every single word that's written
All right, I'm going to
about
reclaim
me
my time.
is not 100% accurate.
Well, I'm done.
And that's exactly why, when it comes to the credibility, why I asked Mr. Davis, Mr. Monaco, to please, let's figure out how.
But that's my point with the credibility.
So that you understand.
These aren't
that the
isolated. These are
credibility
not
that I'm
isolated
trying-
incidents of attack. These were constant deceptions. Whether it's rolling over a $20 million line of credit to a $14 million credit, you went through great lengths to conceal that from one bank, while at the same time you are reducing your net income to another bank. These aren't things that happened on January 1 of 18, January 1 of 17, January 1 of 15. These are things that were constantly involved on a. My question is, was it exhausting keeping track of all the lies that you were telling all these people?
The gentleman's time has expired. You may.
I don't have an answer for him. I
Very
just
well,
thank you for
Mr. Desailly.
continuing the narrative.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Cohen, good luck on your road to redemption.
Thank you. It's going to be a long way.
The opposite of that is perdition, as I remember, and that's particularly hard on your children. So I wish you well, and I wish your family well. Mr. Cohen, as you sort of describe your road to here, Mr. Cooper asked you when the moment was, or moments when you decided you needed to change. It strikes me there is a transition that you have illuminated here. Your period of time, the 10 years working for somebody who you admired as a developer, and then when Charlottesville happened, you in obviously was a key part of it, or you wouldn't be here. But the in-between part I find really interesting and troubling, at least in terms of appearances and confidence that the American people would have in this institution and democracy, quite frankly. So during that period of time, I want to ask you about two specific, if we have enough time. First, the Trump Tower. So you were negotiating for this. As you said, it was to be the tallest building in Europe. In your guilty plea with the special counsel, you quote, say, it quotes, Cohen asked individual one, is that President Trump?
Yes.
Okay. About the possibility of President Trump traveling to Russia in connection with the Moscow project, and asked a senior campaign official about potential business travel to Russia. When did this conversation happen? Do you recall?
Early on in the campaign.
And who a campaign official?
Corey Lewandowski.
What did you discuss in this meeting?
Possibility of which dates that Mr. Trump would have availability if, in fact, that we were going to go over to Russia to take a look at the project. I'm sorry, sir?
So go ahead.
Unfortunately, it never came to fruition because we were never successful in getting the first prong of what I needed, which was ownership or control over a piece of property. And until such time, there was no reason to come up with a date. But when I first received the information request to go to Russia, what I decided to do is I spoke to Mr. Trump about it. He told me to speak to Corey and see what dates might be available if I got the information I needed.
So it stopped because of appearances, or did it stop because the parties decided not to pursue it?
I'm so sorry, I don't understand your question.
So why did the pursuit of the Trump Tower that Mr. Trump has now said, of course he pursued it because he thought he might be going back into the development business. Why was the reason that the deal stopped?
Because he won the presidency.
Okay. So in that interim period of time, you must admit it looks troubling that now that we know what foreign influence was attempting to do, whether there was collusion or not, it certainly appears troubling that Mr. Trump was part of this negotiation, and at the same time what we know, perhaps separately, that the Russians were engaged in our election.
Well, I don't know about them being engaged in the election. I can only talk for myself. Here I would say to Mr. Trump, in response to his question, what's going on with Russia, I'm still waiting for documents, and then that night at a rally, he would turn around and do his battle cry of no Russia, no collusion, no involvement, witch hunt.
Okay, on a separate subject, but somewhat related, On January 17 of this year, the Wall Street Journal published a story stating that you hired John Gager, the owner of a consulting company who works for Liberty University in Virginia, to rig at least 2 online polls related to Donald Trump. Did you hire him?
Those were back in, I believe, 2015?
2014.
2014.
2014. So you did hire him.
Yes, I spoke with Mr. Gauger about manipulating these online polls.
And did he use bots to manipulate the poll?
He used algorithms, and if that includes bots, then the answer is yes.
Yes, that's accurate. Did the president have any involvement
Yes.
in directing you to do this?
Yes.
What were the results of the poll?
Exactly where we wanted them to be. In the CNBC poll, we came in at number 9, and the Drudge Report, he was top of the Drudge Report as well.
Okay.
Poll.
And
please understand also, the CNBC poll was called the Contenders, and it was top 250 people that they named, and it was supposed to be the top 10 most influential people.
Let me just finish with, earlier today, you directed a comment to my colleagues, and I'm quoting, so correct me if I got this wrong. You said the more people who follow Mr. Trump, the more people will be where I am. Is it your expectation that people in the administration will end up where you are?
Sadly, if they follow blindly like I have, I think the answer is yes.
Thank you.
Mr. Stubbe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. When I ran for Congress, I talked about how Washington was broken. But I certainly did not expect the level of political gamemanship, partisanship, and sheer stagnation of policies that would improve the lives of Americans that I'm witnessing today. It is terribly disappointing to me that this committee and its chairman chose to spend our time in questioning an individual that has zero probative value and zero credibility, instead of spending our limited time focusing on improving the lives of Americans, creating jobs, or streamlining the functioning of our federal government. Yet here we are, taking testimony from a convicted liar, and not someone who has just lied to his clients or family or friends, but testimony from an individual who deliberately and premeditatedly lied to this body. He lied to Congress through false statements and written statements. He lied to Congress through his testimony. He then amplified his false statements by releasing and repeating his lies to the public, including the other potential witnesses. Yet now, we on this committee and the American people are expected to believe Mr. Cohen's testimony. I don't know a juror in America that would believe anything Mr. Cohen says given his past actions and lies. Mr. Cohen, you stood before multiple congressional committees before today and raised your right hand and swore an oath to be honest. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And you lied to those congressional committees. Is that correct?
Previously?
Correct.
Yes, sir.
You stated that Trump never directed you to lie to Congress. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Therefore, you lied to Congress on your own accord and then admitted to lying to Congress. Correct?
I've already stated my piece on that. I knew what he wanted me to do. I was staying on party line.
But he never directed you to lie to Congress?
He did not use those words, no.
In your evidence that you provided this committee a mere 2 hours before the hearing started, were payments made to you by Mr. Trump, correct?
Amongst other things, yes.
Yet other than your testimony here today, there's absolutely no proof that those specific payments were for those specific purposes. Is that correct?
It's my testimony that the check that I produced as part of this testimony, the $35,000, and then the second check that's signed by Alan Weisselberg and Don Trump Jr., were 2 checks out of the 11 that were meant for the reimbursement of the hush money payment to Stormy Daniels.
So in your testimony on page 13, you claim, and I quote, Mr. Trump directed me to use my own personal funds from a home equity line of credit to avoid any money being tracked back to him that could negatively impact his campaign. Do you have any proof of this direction?
Just the payment, sir.
So no email?
Mr. Trump doesn't have email.
So no recording?
I do not have recordings, no.
No text message?
Mr. Trump doesn't text message.
So no direction other than your testimony today that that's what the payment was for?
And the fact that I paid on his behalf, at his direction, the money to Keith Davidson's IOLA account. You're right, there's no other documentation I have.
So nothing you produce as part of your exhibits prove that President Trump directed you in any way to make that payment?
I don't even know how to answer that, sir.
Well, it's pretty simple. There's nothing in the evidence that shows, or the exhibits that you provided today, that show that Trump directed you to make those payments.
Other than the non-disclosure agreement that has been seized by government authorities and is widely shown, I don't believe there's anybody out there that believes that I just decided to pay $130,000 on his behalf.
Well, you were his attorney for over 10 years.
That doesn't mean that I pay $130,000.
Well, it doesn't
for his
also mean
30
that he
feet.
wasn't paying you for representation of counsel.
Okay.
So how did President Trump even know you had a HELOC?
I'm so sorry, sir?
How did President Trump even know you had a HELOC?
Because we discussed it. Because I told him the same thing, that I didn't want my wife to find out about it. And as one additional, Rudy Giuliani himself came out and expressed that Mr. Trump reimbursed me for the money that was spent to pay Stormy Daniels.
And did you tell Chris Cohen that you had no access to Mr. Trump during October and November of 2016?
I'm sorry, I don't know what you're referring to.
Your interview with Chris Como.
I would need to see the document.
Did you also tell Chris Como that you made these payments without telling Mr. Trump because you wanted to protect Mr. Trump?
And I was protecting Mr. Trump.
And you told him that you made these payments without telling him?
When I said that, if that's what I said to Chris Cuomo, yes, that was my line.
And if this unsupported claim was true, then it would be part of an ongoing investigation as evidence of a crime, and the Department of Justice would not let you discuss it during your testimony here today. Is that correct?
I don't know.
Someone's time has expired. Did you answer?
Yes, I did want to say one last thing. Not only did I lie to the American people, I lied to the First Lady. When the President called me and I was sitting in a car with a friend of mine, and he had me speak to her and explain to the First Lady. So the answer is you're not accurate, and I don't feel good about any of this, and this was not my intention.
Ms. Lawrence.
Sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to put on the record, as being a Black American and having endured the public comments of racism from the sitting president, as being a Black person, I can only imagine what's being said in private. And to prop up one member of our entire race of Black people and say that that nullifies that is totally insulting. And in this environment of expecting a president to be inclusive and to look at his administration speaks volume. So I have some questions. I want to talk to you about this intimidation of witness. Mr. Cohen, you were initially scheduled to testify before the House Oversight Committee on February the 7th, but your legal team delayed your testimony, quoting, ongoing threats against your family from the president and Attorney Giuliani. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And then on November 29th, after you admitted that the president's negotiations over a real estate project in Russia continue well through the summer before the 2016 election, President Trump called you, quote, a weak person and accused you of lying. And then on December 16th, after 2018, after you disclosed that it was the president who directed you to arrange hush money payments to Stormy Daniels and Karen McDougal to conceal his extramarital affairs, he called you, the President of the United States, a rat. Mr. Cohen, why do you feel or believe that the president is repeatedly attacking you? You are stating that you feel intimidated, asking us to protect you, following your cooperation with law enforcement.
When you have access to 60+ million people that follow you on social media, and you have the ability within which to spark some action by individuals that follow him, and from his own words that he can walk down Fifth Avenue, shoot someone, and get away with it. It's never comfortable when the President of the United States...
What do you think he can do to you?
A lot. And it's not just him. It's those people that follow him in his rhetoric.
What is a lot?
I don't know. I don't walk with my wife if we go to a restaurant or we go somewhere. I don't walk with my children. I make them go before me because I have fear, and it's the same fear that I had before when he initially decided to drop that tweet in my cell phone. I receive some, and I'm sure you'll understand, I receive some tweets, I receive some Facebook Messenger, all sorts of social media attacks upon me, whether it's the private direct message that I've had to turn over to the Secret Service because they are the most vile, disgusting statements that anyone can ever receive. And when it starts to affect your children, that's when it really affects you.
On January 20th, 2019, Mr. Giuliani called your father-in-law, quote, a criminal, and said that he may have ties to organized crime. Mr. Cohen, do you believe that the President, Mr. Giuliani, publicly targeted your father-in-law as an effort to intimidate you? Can you elaborate? Why is your father-in-law being pulled into this?
I don't know the answer to that. My father-in-law was in the clothing business, came to this country because in the 1972-73, the expulsion of Jews from the Ukraine. He came here to this country. He worked hard, and he's now enjoying his retirement. Never in my life did I think that Mr. Trump would do something so disgraceful. And he's attacking him because he knows I care about my family. And to hurt me, he's trying to hurt them. Interestingly enough, my father-in-law's biggest investments happen to be in a Trump property. So it just doesn't make any sense to me.
I want to be clear, any efforts to prevent a witness from testifying in front of Congress is against the law. I want to be real clear about that. And as the chairman has said, retaliating against witnesses and threatening their families and members is a textbook mob tactic that does not benefit the President of the United States or this country. And I want to be on the record, this hearing is not about discrediting the President. It's about the oath of office that we take as members of Congress to have checks and balances and to meet the laws and the policies of this country to serve. Thank you, and I yield back.
Mr. Roy.
Mr. Cohen, I too want to offer my heartfelt thoughts for your family and what they're going through. I know it's tough, and for your time here today, I know it's tough for you to stand here in front of this committee. The chairman suggested you volunteered to come here. You testified that you were asked to come here. Is it correct you were asked to come here, yes or no?
Yes.
The combined total of the crimes for which you were sentenced would bring a maximum of 70 years, yes or no?
Yes.
Yet you are going to prison for 3 years, yes or no?
Yes.
The prosecutors of the Southern District of New York say to secure loans, Cohen falsely understated the amount of debt he was carrying and omitted information from his personal financial statements to induce a bank to lend on incomplete information. You told my colleague here today that you did not commit bank fraud. Not parsing different statutes, which I understand could be, I want for clarity, are you or are you not guilty of making false statements to a financial institution, yes or no?
Yes, I pled guilty.
You said clearly to Mr. Cloud and Mr. Jordan that the Southern District of New York lawyers were being untruthful in characterizing your desire to work in the administration. Do you say again that the lawyers of the Southern District of New York are being untruthful in making that characterization, yes or no?
I'm saying that's not accurate.
Okay, so you're saying they're being untruthful in what they wrote.
I'm not using the word untruthful. That's yours. I'm saying that that's not accurate. I did not want a role or a title in the administration.
I'm sure the lawyers...
I got the title that I wanted.
I'm sure the lawyers at the SDNY appreciate that distinction. Question, you testified today you have never been to Prague and have never been to the Czech Republic. Do you stand behind that statement?
Yes, I do.
I offer into the record an article in known conservative news magazine Mother Jones by David Korn, in which he says he reviewed his notes from a phone call with Mr. Cohen, that Mr. Cohen said, quote, I haven't been to Prague in 14 years. I was in Prague for one afternoon 14 years ago, end quote. Question, you, as my friend Mr. Armstrong rightly inquired, offered to the committee taped information involving clients with the bat of an eye. Do you stand behind that, yes or no?
I'm sorry. I don't understand what you said so fast.
You, as my friend Mr. Armstrong rightly inquired, offered to this committee taped information involving your clients with the bat of an eye. Do you stand behind that offer?
If the chairman asks me, and I'll take it under advisement now, and it's not a problem in terms of attorney-client privilege, yes, I will turn it over.
You and my friend Mr. Meadows pointed out misled this committee even today in a written submission that contradicted your testimony. You have suggested you are going to review that. Are you going to review it in our next break to correct the record, yes or no?
Yes.
Question, you helped out the president's campaign or were involved in the campaign as a representative, as a spokesman, even in your words today. It was your idea for the campaign dating back to 2011. Is that accurate, yes or no?
Yes.
2011 is a year that sticks in my head, for it's the year my daughter was born, and it was the year I was diagnosed with cancer. I was not then pushing for Donald Trump to be president. I was fighting cancer. Even in 2016, I was publicly backing a certain Republican from Texas. Some might guess who it was. But you were all in. And you either wanted Donald Trump to be your president because it would be good for the country, or you did it for your own personal advancement, or both. Sort of the two options. Real Americans in my district and across the country wanted the president to be president, not in any way because he's perfect, but rather because they are sick and tired of this hellhole. They supported the president because they are sick and tired of the games that we are seeing here today. They are sick and tired of politicians who refuse to secure the border, balance our budget, restore health care freedom, and then get the hell out of their way so they can lead their life. They are mystified that we amass about $100 million of debt per hour, which means we've blown through $300, $400, $450 million during this charade in amassing debt. $450 million. They're sick and tired of a Democrat Party that willfully ignores cartel-driven asylum crisis on our border that endangers American citizens and the migrants who seek to come here. Just yesterday in Eagle Pass, Texas, Border Patrol agents arrested an MS-13 gang member. In McAllen, Texas, federal authorities are offering a reward for a man tied to Mexico's Gulf cartel for his alleged roles in various murders, kidnappings, and home invasions in South Texas. A mass Honduran migrant rush at the Texas border forced brief closure of the Laredo port. This is this week. This is what we're ignoring. This is not what we're doing for the American people while we engage in this charade. This is not what the American people sent us here to do. This is an embarrassment for our country. I talked to my beautiful wife back in Dripping Springs, Texas, just before the hearing. I said, don't bother watching. She said, as I roughly expected, don't worry, I won't. I have more important things to do. And she, like the rest of the American people, have a hell of a lot more important things to do than to watch this. I said, amen, darling. I can't help but think that is what the majority of the American people are thinking while watching this unbelievable circus. I yield back.
Ms. Prescott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've got a lot to do as well. I've got houses and schools to help rebuild in the Virgin Islands, expansion of voting rights, educational opportunities, criminal justice reform. Thank God the Democratic majority can walk and chew gum at the same time. So we're here with you right now. Mr. Cohen, you learned well in the 10 years that you worked with Donald Trump. What was your position with the GOP in the up to 8 months ago?
I was vice chair of the RNC Finance Committee.
You were vice chair of the finance of the Republican National Committee, right?
Correct.
Okay.
I do want to say I was a Democrat until Steve Wynn found out I was a Democrat and made me switch parties.
That would be a smart thing to do.
Said it wasn't right for a Democrat to be the vice chair.
Good. Let's get to it. I only have a little bit of time. On behalf of the many members here who have expressed to your family, our apologies to your family. But I want to apologize for the inappropriate comments and tweets that have been made by other members of this body. And as a former prosecutor and as former counsel on House ethics, I think that at the very least there should be a referral to the Ethics Committee of witness intimidation or tampering under USC 1512 of my colleague Matt Gaetz, and it may be possibly him being referred for a criminal prosecution. So I want to put that on the record. On May 2nd, 2018, the President's personal attorney, Rudy Giuliani, who was his personal attorney like you, appeared on Fox News and referred to the President's reimbursement to you for the $130 payment for Stephanie Clifford as part of a retainer. And on May 3rd, 2018, one day after Mr. Giuliani's appearance, the President tweeted, and I quote, "Mr. Cohen, an attorney, received a monthly retainer not from the campaign and having nothing to do with the campaign from which he entered into through reimbursement, a private contract between two parties known as a non-disclosure agreement, or NDA. The Office of Government Ethics, which is the agency which the federal government with responsibility over what the President needs to report publicly about his assets, was puzzled by this, it seems, and they were skeptical that a retainer was actually in place and asked to see the retainer agreement on call of May 8th with the President. The President's personal counsel, Sherry Dillon, replied that she would, and I quote, not permit OGE staff to read the agreement because it is privileged. Ms. Dillon would not even let OGE staff come to her office to review the retainer agreement. Mr. Cohen, in a court filing made in August of last year, federal prosecutors stated that, quote, in truth and in fact, there was no such retainer agreement. Mr. Cohen, did you ever have a retainer agreement in place with the President for the payment to Ms. Clifford?
No.
So was Mr. Giuliani's statement inaccurate?
Yes.
Was Ms. Dillon's statement about the retainer agreement inaccurate?
I'm sorry, Ms. Dillon's statement is?
About the retainer agreement, is it inaccurate?
And her statement is what?
And her statement to them was, quote, not to permit OGE staff to read the agreement because it is privileged.
There was no agreement.
And is the President's tweet or his statement accurate?
And I'm sorry, one more time.
And his statement was, Mr. Cohen, an attorney, received a monthly retainer, not from the campaign and having nothing to do with the campaign, from which he entered in through a reimbursement.
That's not accurate.
You've mentioned some individuals to my colleague from New York, Ms. Connolly, and also in your testimony about Mr. Weisenberg and other individuals, Ms. Rona. Who are those individuals? Are they with the Trump Organization?
They
and
are.
Are there other people that we should be meeting with?
So Alan Weisselberg is the Chief Financial Officer.
Uh-huh.
The
You got to
Trump
quickly give us
Organization.
as many names as you can so we can get to them.
Yes, ma'am.
As Ms. Rona, what is Ms. Rona's position?
Rona Graff is Mr. Trump's executive assistant.
And would she be able to corroborate many of the statements that you've made here?
Yes, her office is directly next to his, and she's involved in a lot that went on.
Okay, Mr. Cohen, when the President's lawyers were having the discussions with the Office of Government Ethics in 2018, did they reach out to you to talk with you about these payments?
No, ma'am.
And what did you share anything with them otherwise in any other conversation?
I do not recall, no.
Can the committee obtain more information about these facts by obtaining testimony and documents from the White House, the Trump Organization, and the President's attorneys?
I believe so.
Mr. Chair, I think that those are the individuals that we should be speaking with, and I yield back at this time.
The committee will now stand in recess again. We will come back. Listen up, 35 minutes after the last vote begins. So for Mr. Cohen, we're talking about probably about an hour or so.
Thank you so much.